So what I'm doing now, I think this is, so today we're going to give you a series of tips for how to advocate for the most appropriate, collaborative, empowering experiences possible using the CANs in treatment planning. All right. Then we have provider-defined competencies. What provider-defined competencies let us do is let us see the provider perspective on how treatment planning should be happening. And then it allows us as advocates to use the language of providers to be able to bring it up to a supervisor or program director to say, you know, I had this experience and it really wasn't what I was hoping for. Is there a way to change that? Right. So this. So what providers have said is highly competent treatment planning are these behaviors, is that the therapist is able to work with families to come up with multiple appropriate goals and specific objectives. So you can really clarify what are the things that you're working towards. Those are things that you as families and youth really care about and think are relevant. That they're actually things that you want to work on. So they're able to elicit motivation and commitment to work on those goals. You're able to say, what are the things that you would do to achieve those goals? It feels like that's something that's important to do to you. They're also able to elicit what it would be like if things weren't changing, right? And this is a motivation strategy, right? So they should be able to say, well, if this does work and we are able to change this, what would it look like? And if things just stayed the way that they were today, this is what that would look like too. Oh, we don't want that. So let's move towards this other piece, right? A good clinician should be able to really elicit both sides of that. You should leave that process with a sense that these are goals that you own, that matter to you, and that you want to work on. And then you should also be able to leave that process with a sense of the hierarchy of goals, that these are the things that are most critical. You're going to prioritize these because they're most closely linked to the outcomes that matter to you, right? Or because they're the things that are absolutely the most pressing and have to be taken care of before you can do anything else, right? So you should have a clear sense of what are the priorities, why are you doing it, what's it going to change, right? And you should also experience that these are your goals. They matter to you. Okay, so if that's happening, then per providers, that's the best case scenario in terms of treatment planning. That's really what a competent therapist would be doing. This next set of behaviors that we're going to describe are what providers themselves indicate occur when there's this is an imperfect process that likely we should still move forward, right? So you would proceed with caution around these. And a provider like this would be able to come up with one or more coherent goals, goals that make sense to you and that relate to the presenting issue. They should be goals that you have ownership of, but you might not internalize all of them, so you might not be able to remember all of them. And you might leave with the sense that, yes, they really did listen to you, but the way the goals were written is a bit more formal than the way that you would have written them. Right? So it's just these, this is a imperfect but good enough scenario, right? Where you can still move forward. There's still goals that get to what it is that you're trying to do. It doesn't feel exactly like the way that you would have done it, right? Or the way that you would have written things. And generally on both sides, we can still proceed. Although you want to make sure that things don't stray from what you're really hoping for, right? And this is why these check-ins and reviews are going to be really important, especially if you're feeling that yellow light scenario. Red light. These are behaviors that providers themselves, supervisors, long-term supervisors, have indicated that if a therapist is engaging with you in the treatment planning process in this way, that you need to find a way to slow down or stop the process, to bring a supervisor or program director in, to really say, look, this is not what we're hoping for around treatment planning. This is not what we're doing. If the goal doesn't relate well to what your presenting issues are, right, that's a very first indicator that something is off. If you can't understand what the goals are or why they're being created, what's the rationale for them, or you feel like it's something that the therapist came up with and they're imposing it on you, if you don't have buy-in and understanding of those goals, then you should not be proceeding. If you feel like they aren't things that you are motivated to do, or they're inappropriate for you to be doing, that's another indicator that you need to stop the process. If the goals feel like they are culturally a strong mismatch for you, or that they don't line up with the developmental progress of your child, so they're beyond what it is that they're capable of doing, then again, that's a sign that the process is not proceeding as it should. If you're being overwhelmed by the number of goals that are listed there, that's also important to note. If the goals only target one environment, but the need is present in multiple environments, that's also an indicator that something important is off. So for instance, if the behavior is happening both at home and at school, and yet there's nothing in the treatment plan about addressing it at school, that's a warning sign. That's an indication that the clinician is not really understanding the totality of the behavior and how to address it. If the clinician can't understand the difference between a goal, an objective, and an intervention, the goal is the big thing that you're working towards, the objectives are the things that are helping get you there, and the interventions are the services that help move you along that pathway, or can't clarify for you how the interventions are designed to support you in meeting those objectives, which help you meet your goal. So if it's really not clear what is being provided as a support to you to help you meet these intermediate goals that help you get to the functioning that you really care about for your child, if that is not crystal clear, then you need to stop the process, because it may not even be clear in the therapist's head, right? If they can't communicate it to you, it might indicate there's some work that they haven't done on their own to make that really coherent and logical. And so that's a great indication that, hey, it is time to stop things and then to elevate it to the supervisor, to the program director, if they're not willing to revisit it with you and work through it until it is understandable. All right. And once again, these are definitions that are provided by supervisors themselves, right? So these are people within the profession saying this is what our profession should do. So using this set of language should be a language that's easy for providers to understand. All right. So if you find yourself in that sticky situation, what are some ways to stop things, to ask, and to elevate? Well, almost every state has a regulation indicating that people who are not fully licensed as independent practitioners are required to disclose that on their first meeting with you. They're also required to tell you who their supervisor is and how to contact them. So immediately, if you hear the word intern, or if you hear somebody say, I'm getting my hours towards licensure, any of those sorts of things, I would immediately ask that, I'd say that's fantastic. It's great to hear that. It's a pleasure to work with you. Who is your supervisor? How can I meet that person, right? Because you want a relationship with the supervisor. they typically have to sign off on an important elements of care. They have to co-sign a fair amount of these documents. And so they have a legal responsibility around this care. And so it's important that you meet them because the buck may stop with them. In agencies, particularly larger agencies, there's also a program manager or a clinical director. So many times you may have fully licensed clinicians, and they're not clinically supervised technically by somebody else because they could operate as independent practitioners. But usually, if it's a decent sized agency, there's a manager who's responsible for that program or set of clinicians, or a clinical director, or there's the owner of the agency, right? And so figuring out who the person is that you would communicate with if things are not moving in the appropriate way with the therapist is really, really important to get early on, right? It's just to figure out who that point of contact is in that process. When something isn't clear, the first thing that I would do is to slow the process down. So ask for it to be explained to you more clearly. You could ask for people to write it out in simple to use language. The treatment planning pyramid is all about you being able to prompt the provider to explain what it is that they're providing. And so when we get to that, that's a one-page document that allows you to see how these things are being organized on the treatment plan and whether or not they make sense, right? You can also ask for documentation. And there is recent federal legislation that has just blown this wide open. You are allowed to access all assessments, treatment plans, and progress notes per federal regulation now. Federal regulation supersedes any state regulations. So anything short of handwritten notes that clinicians have that interpreted the session, those are clinicians, they can always keep that. Anything that they've used to describe care or the care process that they then bill for, you have a right to get it, and you have a right to get it free of charge. If you start asking for those sorts of things, I guarantee you that will be noticed, and that can slow down the process so that you can figure out what's happening and where to go next. As a matter of course, as somebody receiving treatment, I would always ask for the assessments. I would always ask for a copy of the care plans so that you have that basic documentation. But if you get to the point where things really aren't working and you're trying to understand what's going on, you may even want to ask for the progress notes. They might also call them billing notes. And federal legislation has indicated that actually you have a right to receive those documents free of charge. That will slow the process down and get things noticed. I wouldn't do that immediately, but it is something in your quiver should you need it.